my name is Miranda, and today I'm here to review the new book Rebel Spy by Veronica Rossi that just came out today. I love Veronica Rossi. She honestly is one of my favorite authors, and she wrote one of, I think, the most underrated dystopian trilogies of the time, because it came out in that time when all of the dystopian novels were coming out, like the post-Hunger Games, when it was just everyone was doing trilogies set in a dystopian world. The Under the Never Sky trilogy. Love that series so much. Love the characters, all of it, and I think she's such a phenomenal writer, and she crafted such an amazing, awesome world, which is very hard to do, especially back then when everyone was making series like that. So I haven't read a book of hers since then though, since finishing the trilogy, but I really like her as an author, and I think she consistently does different genres and different stories, which I really, really like. I think it's always very interesting when authors kind of don't box themselves into a corner and just write the same kind of genre or story over and over again and do different things. And I really, really love the backstory that she put in the back of the book about why exactly and how exactly she came to write this book, because she explains that basically she sat down one day and wrote, I think it was something like she just typed into Google women in history I should know about or something like that, because oftentimes history kind of favors the victors and the people that are writing the history, and that's usually straight white men. So there's a lot of women, there's a lot of women of color, there's a lot of men of color, there's a lot of LGBT people who they participate in history because they were there. And it's just crazy to think that when we think of all the people that are so well known in history, it's generally all guys, because that's who we're taught. So she looked for, awesome women that we should know about, and one of the searches that she came back was this agent spy from the Revolutionary War, and her code name was, I don't know if it's Agent 355 or if they said Agent 355, but basically this is a spy who no one really knows their real identity, but 355 in the code that they have translates to lady. So historians generally assume that this is a woman who was probably of some kind of higher status in the fact that she was called lady. She was part of the whole spy ring that really helped be influential in winning the war for George Washington. They worked for him, and it was even said that although no one knows her exact identity, she had some kind of information or something that really contributed to helping turn the tide of the war. So just a whole awesome story, which I feel one, I didn't know about the spy ring in particular, but that's just a failing because I actually never learned about a certain part of US history in my school, just because the way our school was set up was you took AP World your sophomore year, and then if you didn't take that, you took the first part of US history. So I took AP World, and then the junior year you're either supposed to take AP US history, which would tell you the whole thing, and ideally that's the people who took AP World and didn't get the first part of US history, or the people who took the first part of US history take the second part of US history. I, however, hated my AP World class, and it literally made me so depressed, and I lost so much weight, and it just contributed to so many issues that I was I'm not taking another history class AP, no thank you. So I took the US history part 2, but that only started post-industrialization, 1800s, 1900s. So there's a whole ass period of history I don't know, and it's when this book is set. So, for me, I'm just learning new things as I go, learning about the spy ring, which was super, super dope. So obviously, while we don't know the identity of this lady in particular, Veronica Rossi crafted this character around who this could potentially be, and she makes it this girl, Franny, who has lost her mom and is now living with her stepdad. Her stepdad is a super creep, wants to basically marry her, and is just abusive to her verbally, physically, just not a good time, and she realizes that she has no kind of prospects going on. She doesn't want her life to just continue in the way it's going. So one night, fortune favors the bold, and there's a shipwreck after a massive storm, and this body of a girl that looks like her washes up on shore. So her and her friend switch the identities of her and the girl, and she assumes the life of this socialite, this rich girl, and she's rescued by the people that have been hired to save her, and almost everyone who knew what the girl looked like originally also died in the ship, so she just can kind of safely assume on this position. And then that's where the book really goes from there, is she kind of along the way starts to learn more about what exactly the Patriots are fighting for and what exactly justice and liberty mean to this nation that is starting to be birthed. So it's very interesting. I think it's more about the story, how exactly she comes into this spy ring and in being a spy and being so crucial in it. I think it's a really interesting premise because the whole thing about why she's such a good spy is obviously like she's smart and intelligent and can figure out how to do stuff, but it's because women back then, and I mean even nowadays, but women back then especially, were just seen as like just there, like they were invisible. So they got to go to all these dinners and these fancy balls with these guys who were super high up in the British Army, and these guys would just talk about like what they were doing, their plans, their battles, stuff like that, openly in front of these women, thinking that like they just didn't care or know what was happening. So that's kind of why she got to figure out so much. And I think that's such an interesting concept of like these people who are just marginalized and seen as like invisible and just there for like not like, don't worry your pretty little head about that. Like they could actually be the ones that find out the most information out of anyone because they get to go in these circles and everyone assumes they're so kind of just head in the clouds, not really caring about it. I do think this book is more again about like her coming into being a spy and stuff like that. So it's not necessarily like, it doesn't read like a James Bond, like there's no like subterfuge or big like secrecy or something like that. Like it reads like a spy book, but like a more realistic kind of one of like what it was like with like going to parties, and it's not all action and high class and stuff like that. It's like, you know, just kind of doing the work, finding the papers, stuff like that. But I think it did work because like I said, it felt realistic, especially for the time period. I think the biggest thing with this book is the pacing was kind of off for me. It starts off right away. You start off at the end of the book basically when she's getting arrested. They find out she's a spy and she's being sent to this big prison. So you start off with that just to kind of get an idea of like where this is all leading. Then it jumps back to a few years when everything first starts to happen and she assumes the identity of this girl in the first place. Then we jump a few years ahead and that's when kind of all the spy stuff starts to get going. And I just feel like overall, like I said, the pacing isn't super great. I think before, like the before stuff, when she's first assuming this girl's identity and she's taking the ship to go all the way to New York, that definitely was a bit too slow. Like I think it took a bit long to get going and really get invested and interested in it. And then I think on the flip side of that, the end of the book, particularly like maybe the last like 50 pages when stuff starts to come out, I think was really rushed. I would have liked to see more of an ending, I think, and just more, there's a lot of stuff that like you don't actually see it. She just like tells you what happens like through weeks or months at a time in like 2 paragraphs, and I think I really would have liked to see more of that actually happen instead of just being told to us. There's also a small, I call it small because like I walked away not really loving it, love interest that I think obviously this book is more important than a love interest, and I think that's why it's not a big focus. I do think like the focus is more on Franny herself and kind of coming into her own and making these decisions for herself. But there is a love interest who he's in the beginning of the book when it's kind of like the slow aspect of it. And it is not even that long. So like you kind of, for me, I didn't full on feel invested in the relationship just because of how little time they were together. And then he disappears for a bit during the time jump and then comes back again. And I just feel like we never got enough time with them. Like even when we got time, it again was kind of like that thing where like they'd spend weeks or days together, but it all got summarized in like a paragraph or 2 for us. So I feel like for me, I wasn't like as invested in the relationship as I think the author wanted us to be and as Franny was, and that's a shame because I do think it could have been something interesting since he is kind of the guy that first introduces her to the ideas of patriotism and what they're fighting for and the idea of all men and women are created equal and stuff like that, and that's really what kind of propels her later on to get involved in the spy ring when she starts to see these injustices and see how unfair life truly is for, you know, a lot of the people that are fighting against the British. So I think that's kind of, it was a bummer because like I love the romance in Under the Never Sky. I think it's so cute. But overall, I do think like the middle chunk of this book, when she's actually doing the spying, when she's first getting into it and she's actually doing it, I think that's my favorite part, and that part definitely read very, very well because you could see she's very comfortable. You see her get more confident and she is very determined to produce something that is very valuable to them, that they can use, that George Washington can use. And I think it feels like, obviously we don't know who this woman really is, who Agent 355 was, but it feels realistic to what it could be. Like she didn't like she wasn't doing crazy, like I said, James Bond stunts, hanging out windows, stuff like that. She was using her means and her opportunity to figure out the information she could. And I think it read very, very well because you don't see a lot of spy books like that, you know, like that are kind of more subtle in their subterfuge. There were some plot points that I was kind of like, I wish this had been explained better. Someone shows up from her past at a certain point, but but it had already been kind of decided that, like, by her, that they couldn't show up because they didn't have the means to travel all that way, and then it's just not explained how they did, like, figure out where they were or how they got there, and that was kind of frustrating. But I think the character of Franny is very, very interesting and entertaining, and just to see her kind of come into her own and really make her own decisions and be confident with those. Be like, you know, even if this is something that I'm gonna get caught with, like, I know I'm doing it for the greater good, and I think that's really great. It also has some real life characters, obviously. There's Benedict Arnold, but then there's also some characters who were also really involved in the spy ring in real life. So I think that was really cool, because some of them I had never read about, like I said, so it was cool to learn about those. There was another woman, there were actually 2 other women that were involved heavily, not only in the spy ring, but in helping kind of transport prisoners, spread information, stuff like that. So it was really cool to learn about that, and I think it's an interesting one. I think if you're a history buff, definitely, and also if you like kind of spy novels but not super like action packed, like not like craziness, twist happening, just like a very heavily like this feels realistic kind of book. So I really liked it. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and if you have read the book or are interested in reading it, please feel free to leave your thoughts about it down in the comments. Also make sure this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!